with that, we go to another speaker that is a CEO of a company that I'm sure many, many engineers in the audience rely on a daily basis. So Prashanth Chandrasekar is the Chief Executive Officer of Stack Overflow, and he's, among many things, responsible for driving Stack Overflow's overall strategic direction and results. He's a proven technology executive with extensive experience leading and scaling high-growth global organizations. Previously, he served as a Senior Vice President and General Manager of Rackspace Cloud and Infrastructure Services portfolio of businesses. And he's been in the tech industry for very, very long. So I'm really eager to hear his talk that is probably going to be fairly aligned with how Mozilla and a few other powerful internet companies are thinking. So he's going to share with you how you can power success by fostering community. Please give a warm welcome to Prashanth.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and really, really phenomenal audience today. Thanks so much for the opportunity to address all of you and talk a little bit about Stack Overflow and what we do with communities more broadly. So excited to share some content here about powering success by fostering community. So my name is Prashanth Chandrasekar. I'm the CEO of Stack Overflow. I've been at the company for about a couple of years. I joined from Rackspace, which is a cloud services company, where I was there for about 7 years, focused on cloud services on Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. But Stack Overflow, just a phenomenal opportunity and a privilege for me to be able to lead this company and more broadly the community of software developers in the world. So just very quickly about the impact that we drive, right? So you might know Stack Overflow as, for our massively popular website that obviously has 100 million monthly visitors, which makes us a top 50 website in the world. And we have, the 50 plus million questions and answers that are on the platform, is sort of after about 13 years of really sort of contributing to the platform from a community perspective. And every 14 seconds, a question is asked on our platform, which sort of gives you a sense of the complexity of the questions and answers that people are really sort of grappling with as technology moves very, very rapidly in this world. So it's really exciting to see that level of engagement on our website, 13 years into our history. So we're, really, we can humbly and factually say that we are the world's largest platform for developers and technologists. Really sort of, a good sizable chunk of people in this audience are likely using Stack Overflow pretty much on a daily or weekly basis. So we're excited for that. So in terms of, just to give you a sense of how the company's evolved, we have what is depicted here in the middle of the screen, which is our public community, which everybody uses, the 100 million people that I just mentioned. But we have two products, one on the left and one on the right. One is a private version of Stack Overflow, which is called Stack Overflow for Teams, and which is on the left. And we have a product that's very focused on engaging developers and companies to fully engage with those developers on our platform, which is called Reach and Relevance, which is all about our advertising products. So, companies can build their communities on top of Stack Overflow, even with some new products that we've launched called collectives on Stack Overflow, which are mini sub-communities for companies to engage with their developers in their ecosystem. So that's how our company's set up. And this has happened over a decade. We started with the community, and then we obviously established a very strong brand in this space. And then we finally are now on our product-led journey, which has been, very, very exciting for us to sort of embark on as a new team in many ways. All right, so I think suffice to say that we are obsessed with communities, right? We just absolutely live and breathe. It is the foundation of our company. It's in our core values. It's in our yearly, our goals to make sure that we are a very healthy and thriving and growing community. And we're really blessed to work with, what I consider to be, some of the developers and technologists who have such an amazing DNA of really caring for each other and sharing. So that if they do get stuck with a problem, it could be a Python problem, or it could be a JavaScript problem, or it could be an AWS problem that they have encountered while building an application, they're very much interested in making sure that they share those issues and those solutions to those issues with their fellow developers around the world. And that's what really sort of gets us going, and it ties to our mission statement, which is all about empowering the world to develop technology through collective knowledge. And that is really what we focus on literally a daily basis. So, by the way, communities is not, we just don't talk about it. This is, there are many companies that are beginning to think about this in a lot more structured way. But even in a recent study that was conducted by First Round Capital, they talked about the fact that about 80% of founders reported that building a community was, really important to their business, and about 30% said that it was a moat, meaning a strategic differentiator and a sort of important aspect of their business and critical to their success ultimately. So this is a couple of years in terms of it being dated, but we certainly believe this is going to be the era of community-led development, which is very much underway. We talk about a few examples with community-oriented companies. We sort of wanted to share a couple non-tech examples, non-developer focused examples as well, in addition to our own. And if you look at companies like Nextdoor, which has built, turned an entire, neighborhood community into digital communities, all around the country and the world potentially. Peloton, which has turned effectively home workouts into a global fitness community. And then, of course, Stack Overflow, where we have just, obviously these very large numbers where people are coming together to help solve each other's problems. And so it's really the point being that, there are many great examples of, communities really driving some great outcomes for the members of the community and also helping drive growth for companies that are engaged in this sort of activity. So as I think about success, more broadly, and we think about growth is one of the sort of the fundamental elements of success. I wanted to sort of highlight a few different pillars, and I want to talk about, 4 different things that I believe are super critical to success. And I'll focus a lot more on community here, but just to make sure that we are comprehensive and I give you sort of a holistic view, I wanted to cover a couple of things. So one is, I'm sure all the product technology folks who are listening obsess about this topic, product market fit and expansion, and, how are ways in which your product can ensure that, you're solving a big problem for customers before, and this is important to do obviously before you scale, expanding the scope of the use cases that you're covering and so on. Second point is all around go-to-market approach and expansion. So there are many ways to go to market, as we all know. And what are the options and how do you decide to do that? And how do you expand your go-to-market motion at the right time? Thirdly, there's competitive differentiation. So this is all about, with so many startups and companies being formed, and it's easier than ever to start a company these days relative to maybe 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. How do you make sure that you stand out from the pack and grow despite the competition that exists in a very, very sort of what is increasingly fragmented in pretty much every space? And then finally, state-specific team, which I really am a big believer of, is that the teams that sort of got you to a certain point in the evolution of the company may not be the team, in entirety that gets you to where you want to go. So how do you scale both from a product and go-to-market perspective and really sort of think about your team and the composition of your team very deliberately? So a lot's been written about, number 1 and number 2. So I'll breeze through those, but I'd love to spend a little bit more time on number 3 as it relates to community, and then a little bit more on number 4 as well. So let's get into it. So product market fit and expansion. This is obviously the first item, which I think is fundamental to pretty much every company. So let's talk about fit, and then let's talk about expansion. So on the fit side, this is all about really delivering repeatable value very early in the customer journey, to make sure that you have those aha moments, that value is recognized. And then, of course, that allows you to capture value as a company. But it's important to make sure you do this even before you, do things like very custom-oriented things for, as you move up market to things like enterprises. It's sort of a slippery slope once you sort of go down the path of, growing too fast before you actually establish this very early in your product lifecycle. Secondly, I think it's all about making sure that you're focused on leading indicators and not just lagging indicators. So measuring things like churn is mostly an outcome of a lot of things that happen throughout the evolution of your product. So, having really intelligence about how your product's being used in the product. What is your customer success organization or team or small team telling you about how customers are using the product and whether they're finding value and so on. So all of that, I think, determines fit. This is not comprehensive, but at least those are a couple of points that I think are very important as you sort of think through it. And then expansion, of course, comes in a couple of different ways on the product side. One is around when you think about the problem journey and the use cases that you're solving. I think you can look at, if there's a particular workflow of events that your ultimate end user is leveraging, how do you make sure that you are thinking pre that stage and post that stage as it relates to activities that they care about in their sort of evaluation of whatever they're doing, right? So if you're trying to manage things on the cloud, you need to first of all select which cloud you're going to use as an example. So if you're focused on the latter activity, perhaps there's an opportunity for you to build a product earlier in that evaluation, that workflow, as one example. And then the final sort of example here is around adjacent organizations for use cases. So if you're focused on a very specific persona, and I'll give you Stack Overflow as an example, we focus a lot of our time on engineering and product organizations. But there are also organizations, go-to-market organizations and other organizations like product marketing that also engage with those organizations. So how do we make sure that if there is an opportunity to extend the product into those other groups, in our case, we have our asynchronous Stack Overflow for Teams product that's used in those other organizations. Those are natural ways to sort of expand the product's fit. All right, now let's talk about go-to-market, which is, of course, another very, very critical area as founders and teams think about how to really grow their businesses. So firstly, approach. So there are a few different things you have to keep in mind. I think it's important to establish, are you a product-led organization or sales-led organization or marketing-led organization? That really aligns the company and the team really well to make sure that you are building things, in the right order and you're focusing on the right things in terms of whether it's the user journey that matters or is it all mostly oriented towards customers and so on. That's important. I think having freemium and free trials is sort of a norm for almost all product-led companies. And so that's, I think, an important way to get distribution for your product. Thinking about, direct versus indirect sort of motions, I think are also sort of a natural evolution. If you have a direct sales team, ultimately you could think about expanding into alliances and opening up a channel motion, working with system integrators. Those are all indirect motions that at some point make sense. And then finally, of course, keeping the unit economics of what you're doing, top of mind. So whether that's, LTV to CAC or the payback period of how much you're spending in marketing and how long it takes for you to actually attract a customer and hopefully retain that customer. All those things I think are important points. And then expansion, there are three ways to do it. One is really when you think verticals, industry verticals like financial services, you could consider packaging up a lot of what you do as you get more and more sort of focused on that approach to create solutions for that particular industry. And the more customers that you have that are concentrated in a particular sector gives you the opportunity to do that, to make it much more relevant to that segment. And talking about segments, I think this different sort of segmentation would be around the size of companies. So obviously everybody thinks about the SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. Which order do you typically go in? At Stack Overflow, we ironically started in the enterprise, and now we've actually gone to the mid-market and even to the SMB. So we've gone in reverse order, only because our platform operated at enterprise scale to begin with, and that was our natural motion, which is more the exception than the rule. Typically, people seem to go upmarket, and in my own experience prior to this was that. So, and then the final sort of vector here would be geographic regions, especially if you can replicate what you're doing in one part of the country or one part of the world rather, in another part of the world, if your product is in fact scalable that way. And perhaps you should make some deliberate choices around things like local language support, local currency billing, local go-to-market teams. They're all trade-offs that you'd have to make. But these are all opportunities as you think about expanding your product. All right. Now let's talk about competitive differentiation. I think this is the part where I think it's important to talk about communities. And there are many different ways to go about doing this. Many companies have had different orders in terms of how they've gone about doing this. But traditionally speaking, people start with foundationally the product, right? And they think about how do you really, think about differentiating with features and quality and reliability and so on. And there's so many examples like this, right? Whether it's the tech space or the non-tech space, you can think of most companies start here. They then move on to establishing a great brand, and this could also, many companies have also started here sometimes, just by establishing a solid brand based on all sort of the foundational principles of great brands, values, or could be convenience, could be customer support, like Zappos is a good example of that, the shoe company, and so on. There are many different factors that you can think of. And then thirdly, I would say this is sort of a less recognized, but I believe an extremely powerful way to differentiate your company is through community. And the way you do that is really through a few different mechanisms. One is having a really powerful shared identity. In our case, it's developers and technologists who really love helping their fellow developers and technologists getting unstuck. It's creating incentives and rewards, in our case, gamification, so that people get a tremendous sense of accomplishment when they're helping their fellow developer technologists, but also getting recognized for it through, Stack Overflow reputation and points and badges. And then ultimately their ability to showcase that, they could be the world's best Python programmer in the world. And this sort of mechanism has existed for over a decade, built by our wonderful founders and the community in concert. So that's the second element. The third one is all about building with the community versus for the community. And we partner very closely with our power users and the moderator community, the meta community, and sort of to make sure that we build from outside in is important. And then finally, breaking down silos across various organizations. We do this in our Stack Overflow for Teams product. And then finally, it's about making sure that you've got virtuous cycles, which is about making sure that you've got the products in the community really sort of humming, in concert. So ultimately, what matters here, one of the points I was going to mention here is around the order of this, right? So when you think product, brand, and community, most companies, as I mentioned, start with product, move to brand, then go to community third. But what we have done at Stack Overflow is we actually started with the community, which is on the right-hand side, went to establishing a great brand, and now we're on our product journey. So I think it's sort of a deliberate motion that I think companies have to sort of decide what are they trying to solve? Is the problem large enough that a whole bunch of people come together to solve it? If that's the case, then community first could be an answer for you. But just know that there's no one size fits all. It depends on your company. So that's the point here. All right, so ultimately, community is a moat, as Warren Buffett would say, a strategy moat, or differentiating in the medieval world, having a body of water with the castle in the middle, right? And so that is what we're talking about, and community provides that. It provides that defense mechanism. It's very hard to sort of really break it apart once it's been established. And in our case, when we think about the public community is sort of what we really are all about. Really, it's the foundation of our company. And then our paid products really sort of are an extension of that. And they sit within that walled garden, within that moat. And that's really why it makes it sort of so powerful for us as we think about, really sort of focusing on our community. And the products are sort of a function of that motion. All right, the last point here would be around a stage-specific team. So this is all about what team is appropriate for what stage in the company. So in very sort of simplistic terms, and this is just mostly indicative, I would say that there are, when you think about the product side, when you're in early stage teams, it's all about having a super tight group of people. The founder, there are no sort of blurry, there are a lot of blurry lines, and there are not a lot of fancy titles generally at this stage. And you've got people really focused on establishing their product market fit, whether it's product architecture, engineering, and so on, and really getting that direct customer feedback. So you really know what you're building and whether or not whether you're actually solving a big enough problem, and if your product is really solving that problem from an outcome perspective. I think super important to stay close. And then on the go-to-market side, you typically, don't start out with an expert sales leader. You start with somebody who's mostly sort of a product evangelist who is in sales, and you're really sort of working with what I would consider fairly a ragtag group of people that are trying to sell the product, and you really have a very scrappy team to get it going, because that's what you need at this stage to really get close to the customer, right? Now, this is different as you sort of evolve and you progress in the mid stage of this process. You're going to need to sort of call this between over 10 million or so of ARR. you're going to need a full product team with product management, user research, product design. You can start now delegating some of that activity because you've established hopefully product market fit at this stage. And on the sales and go-to-market side, you really have somebody who's sort of a builder VP of sales. You can hire your first VP of sales here, but you're going to need to make sure that that person is really going to roll up their sleeves and really sort of get into sort of the detail. And then, of course, establishing things like cadences and sales methodologies like BANT and MEDPIC. If you don't know what those are, you should go check them out on Google. But they're all sort of very sort of established sales methodologies on how you go about scaling, your qualification process and so on. And ultimately, of course, making sure that you got SDRs or sales development reps and a customer success organization that focuses on renewals and upgrades. So this is sort of in the mid stage of the process. And then finally, in the late stage of the process, you are, again, on the product side, you've got, a lot more, all the mid-stage items I just mentioned, but you've got a lot more formalized mechanisms like customer advisory boards and roadmap reviews, and really sort of focusing on a deliberate allocation of resources between what is, truly differentiating in your product versus what's, just keeping you relevant in the market relative to the competition, because competition is probably pretty ripe at this stage. And then on the go-to-market side, you're really sort of transitioning to more of a sort of a forecast machine sales leader who's focused on predictability and all the things I just mentioned on the previous point around mid-stage, but also really focusing on things like sales enablement in a very sort of, deliberate way with a lot of, territory planning. You can potentially include a deal desk, things like that. So it's really sort of, appropriate that you bring in the right kind of people at the right stages, because not everybody can do the same thing, or not everybody can do all these things consistently as the company sort of scales. So it's important as leaders to make that call at the right time. So in conclusion, these, just to summarize, there are 4 different things to focus on as you think about quote unquote success: product market fit and expansion, go-to-market approach and expansion, competitive differentiation, and specifically, as I mentioned, communities is a underestimated mechanism for differentiation. And finally, having a state-specific team, which is appropriate for your company at the stage at which it's evolving. So with that, I will end my presentation. You can reach me on Twitter or on LinkedIn with my handle there at @Chandrasekar. But welcome any questions that all of you have.
Thank you so much, Prashanth. That was really great, and I really appreciate that you share your wisdom and learnings that you have with operating this powerful community at Stack Overflow. So for all the people in the audience, so Prashanth, as he said, he's going to be available in the Q&A stage right after that. So he'll probably take like 2-3 minutes to jump over to the Hopin tool. But there you can ask him all of the questions you ever had about Stack Overflow or building communities for your product. And with that, I really want to thank you and look forward to hear a lot of the interesting questions that happen on the Q&A stage. Thank you so much, Prashanth.
Thanks so much, Philip. Appreciate it.